Anyway, we do have a great program for you today. A couple of guests that I happen to be quite familiar with, and some of you in the audience may as well. Mark Wilson serves as the president and CEO of the Florida Chamber of Commerce. That's Florida's largest and most influential business organization, business advocacy organization in the state. Mark leads the rather substantial political, legislative lobbying. They do a lot of grassroots as well as economic research, which is where Dr. Parrish comes in, so we'll learn more about that from him. Anyway, the Chamber's goal is pretty simple. They just want to make Florida more competitive by diversifying Florida's business climate and providing high-wage jobs for Floridians that are currently here, and the thousands a day that, or I guess I won't exaggerate, 1,000 a day that are moving here. So is focused on unifying the business community, where they certainly want to rally around issues that are important to the business community. They have the Florida Business Agenda, which is their sort of premier business action agenda, where they seek to influence policy over at the Capitol. Everything, taxes, workforce issues, regulatory, lawsuit abuse reform, they cover the full gamut. In addition to the legislative side, also very involved on the political side, really from two fronts. Mark's been the architect behind some statewide campaigns, notably relative to constitutional amendment reform. In particular, the raising the threshold for amendments to pass to 60%. Based on some of the junk going on there now, I wonder if we need to go to like 65% or something. But that's crazy, because at the time we thought 60% was a pretty high threshold, and now we're still getting a lot of stuff in there. But and then they're also involved from a political side in terms of influencing who's elected, and in some cases, more importantly, who's not elected or re-elected. So serves on boards across the state, Enterprise Florida, Leadership Florida, the Florida Chamber Foundation, very involved with the Florida Council of 100, as well as the U.S. Chambers Committee of 100. He's a native of Illinois, got his bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia, and holds the highest national delegation for chamber executives, which is the Certified Chamber Exec. So that's going to be our first speaker, but real quick, I'm going to also introduce Dr. Parrish, and then we'll just let them have the program. Dr. Jerry Parris is the chief economist and the director of research at the Florida Chamber Foundation. So the foundation is sort of that educational research arm of the Florida Chamber of Commerce. He's really just in charge of conducting a rather large amount of in-depth analysis that they do of Florida's economy, and then presenting solutions to secure Florida's future as a great place to do business. So prior to joining the Chamber, he was the chief economist and the director of the Center of Competitive Florida at Florida Tax Watch, which I think we've had them speak, so many of you are probably familiar with that. He's also served as the associate director of the Center for Economic Forecasting at Florida State. Got some private sector experience as well. I'll just cut this because it's a lot. He's currently adjunct professor at Florida State in their Master's in Applied Economics program at FSU. He's got a BS in Agricultural Business and Economics from Auburn, an MBA from Bellarmine University, an MS in Economics from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and a PhD from Economics in Auburn. So I'm pretty sure he knows what we're talking about when he talks economics. Let's go ahead and welcome our guest, and we'll start off with Mark Wilson.
All right, well, we'll do a mic check first. Can everybody hear us okay? All right, great. So first of all, thanks for the invitation. It's more rare than you would imagine to get invited to speak in the town that you live in. When you do what we do for a living and you cover all of Florida, we do hundreds of presentations a year. Only a few of them are actually here in Tallahassee. So it's literally an honor. I'll speak for both of us. It's an honor to get invited to do this. And so when Doug Wheeler called and asked us to do this, we literally checked calendars and said, absolutely, let's do this. I was asked earlier why your organization is so important. And I think it's the same thing as I would say about why does the Florida Chamber matter. It's because collectively, right, if you see what's on screen, uniting business for good, it's really what has made this country. Right? And if you think about where Florida's going, when you think about the Tallahassee opportunity, if the business community unites together, there's literally nothing we can't do. But every time we splinter, we lose and the community loses. And so, again, really appreciate the opportunity to be here. What we're going to do is we're going to go quickly through quite a bit of information and some of our context and perspective of what's going on in Florida, what's going on locally, why it matters to small business, and what we're all trying to do about it. I'll do the first portion and then Jerry's going to do the rest. You will quickly see that Rocky was exactly right. I run the place, and Jerry's the brains of the place. And so oftentimes, I'll call Jerry 3 or 4 times a day and ask a question, and he just sort of shakes his head, like, are you seriously asking that? And I say that with all humility because my role, I run 17 different companies inside the Florida Chamber umbrella. And if you think about my role, we've got the political action reality of trying to get good policy passed in the most important state politically in America. And we have to translate the political language of where we get stuff done into the economic language of what you all do for a daily basis. And so most of the reason Jerry shakes his head at me isn't because I went to the University of Georgia, it's because literally we're trying to translate the political possibilities with the economic realities. And I hope you'll see some of that come through today. So Doug, Will, Patrick, Rocky, thanks for the invitation for us to be here today. Both of our presentations will be available for download for all of you. We'll show you how to do that later. And we hope to have plenty of time for Q&A, or if you want to correct anything that we say, we're certainly used to getting that as we travel around Florida as well. One disclaimer on the front end is we are nonpartisan and unabashedly pro-business, especially small business. And so if we say anything today that offends you, I don't care. We're saying it from that perspective, right? Because we just fundamentally believe that if we can help champion small local businesses and we can add jobs, then we can grow our GDP that way. And I'm reasonably sure that'll come through today. And if it offends somebody, let's talk about it afterwards. We're not going to intentionally try to offend somebody, but if you're offended, we probably ought to talk about what we all believe in the first place. We're going to go fast, but because Doug Wheeler introduced me as having a bit of a constitutional amendment background, I've chaired several statewide campaigns, and Doug's right. You might remember when we changed the threshold in Florida for passage of constitutional amendment from 50% plus 1 to 60%. I chaired that effort. And I'm going to bring that up right away to tell you how difficult it is to translate the political to the voter back to the politician and then to small businesses who are thinking about making payroll instead of, the way the process works. 60%. Do I have any lawyers in the room? And I'm not going to make a lawyer joke, don't worry. How do you write 60% in a contract? 3/5. Right? Look up legal jargon, and everywhere you go, the legislature and the legal community writes it up as 3/5. We did some polling, and it turns out that voters in Florida like 60%, about 10% more than they like 3/5. Just think about that for a second, okay? And so policy matters, but the way we talk about policy really matters. In case you didn't put 2 and 2 together, 3/5 and 60% are the same thing. And voters in Florida like 60%, about 10% more than they like 3/5. So if you're trying to get something done locally, I will just tell you, a group of you meeting saying, hey, here's a good policy for us locally, it makes perfect sense to you. You're business leaders. You have your own jargon. We have our own jargon. But then as soon as you start talking to voters in Leon County, they don't know what you're talking about, because we're talking a different language. And so when people like Patrick Slevin say, hey, we need to do some research on this, they know what they're talking about, right? It's a whole different language out there. So again, we're going to quickly talk about uniting business for good. We just fundamentally believe at the Florida Chamber good things can happen when we all stay united. I wanted to thank Doug Wheeler right out of the box here, and Doug's an example of why leadership matters. Years ago, we all worked together on a statewide research initiative about manufacturing and exports and trade and logistics. And we are trying to add about 200,000 manufacturing jobs in Florida over the next decade. And one of the ways we're going to do that is to help expand trade. We need to export more from Florida. And so we put 2 reports together, and you probably can't see it, but Doug was a major part of this initiative. Rick Scott got a copy of this report and immediately started implementing it in the Florida legislature. We have 15 ports, and I don't want to steal Doug's thunder, but just let me give you a perspective. Essentially, for every 100 containers that comes into Florida, right, full, half leave empty. So if you've ever rented a car one way or you've done a one-way flight before, you know it's a lot more expensive. And so one of the ways we can make doing business in Florida less expensive and more competitive for local businesses is to make the cost of trade less expensive and more competitive. That means we have to make more in Florida, and manufacturing jobs are great jobs. And so Doug, what you do at the Ports Council is essential. So if you're thinking, well, Tallahassee doesn't have a seaport, that's not the point. Tallahassee has quite a few manufacturers, especially small and mid-sized manufacturers, and what we ought to be doing is talking about how do we grow that, how do we expand that. And I simply wanted to give a shout out to what Doug does, because since we don't have a port down the street and you can't see what ports do all the time, it's easy to be out of sight, out of mind, but we can't let that happen, so appreciate it. All right, the point here is everything about Florida is changing. I think it's been about 386 days since we had our first case of COVID in Florida, confirmed case of COVID in Florida. Rocky talked about March, we talk about, it feels like it's March 95th, right? It feels like we're still stuck in March of last year because we really never moved past here. But the point of this is, if we gave this presentation 60 days from now, much of it would be different because Florida is not like Ohio, it's not like somewhere else. We are changing literally right in front of our eyes. And so, big picture, want to give a little bit of context. So Jerry is not only our chief economist, by the way, we're the only chamber in the country that has a full-time chief economist. So he's not just the brains of the operation. He literally is helping us think through where does the next 2 to 30 years need to be and what do we need to do about it. What you're looking at right there is a picture of about $1.5 million worth of research that we did 2 years ago. And we looked at where's the world going to be in 10 years, and where can Florida be? Where can the business community be? And I just want to set up Jerry with a couple of numbers. So you see 17th to 10th up there. If Florida was a country, we would be the 17th largest economy in the world, right? At about $1.11 trillion GDP, we're a pretty big deal. But the research says if you all band together, and if we support local businesses in Florida and we support growing the private sector, that Florida can grow to the 10th largest economy in the world if we were a country in just 10 years. And so if you just stop right there, if you dedicated every NEBA meeting for the next 10 years to what are you all doing locally to help Florida become the 10th largest economy in the world over the next 10 years, and bring in speakers and commit to support policies that actually help us grow the economy of Florida, then we don't leave it up to the elected leaders to do that. We sort of take matters into our own hand and we start having better conversations. So just want to throw that out there. There's 39 things that Florida needs to do, from tort reform to making sure our tax climate stays this way, to getting businesses more involved in civics. And we're not going to go through these 39 today, but I wanted to give you the backdrop of how important strategic planning is to us. A couple of bullet points you'll see up there. Feel free to ask Jerry about them later. We're going to grow by about 4 million more people in Florida over the next 10 years. We're already over 22 million. We're going to add 4 in the next 10 years. And we realize there's a lot of people in Florida who say, well, how do we stop that from happening? We think 4 million more is what the estimate is, so how do we do it the right way? Right? That's the better question. The 2 million up there, you all need to create about 2 million new jobs over the next decade for Florida to be where it needs to be. You see the 50 million number up there? We're going to have about 50 million more visitors to Florida annually by 2030. That's on top of the 130 million visitors that we have annually pre-COVID. Right? So you're probably wondering, where are they all going to go? How's this going to work? Right, that's the question. Right? But they're the reason we don't have a personal income tax also. And then also, finally, you see a 3 million number up there. We're going to have 3 million more drivers on our roads in 10 years. So if the business community can talk about this, what are we doing locally about this, right? What can we be doing locally about this? That's really the question that we want to ask. All right, here's a virtual billboard that we did. If you think about it for a second, right, Jerry will talk about how much Florida is growing. And, this is the kind of thing we're doing. I'm getting calls regularly, so is Jerry, from the Wall Street Journal, from Bloomberg, all over the country saying, hey, everybody's moving to Florida. Businesses are relocating to Florida. Like, what's going on? Florida's doing a lot right, but a lot of states are doing a lot wrong. And so if we were literally going to give a Business Leader of the Year award, it would have to go to Cuomo, because they've made so many bad decisions in New York that people are literally moving here. And I don't know if Jerry has it in his deck, but New York has had a lot of people leave. No state has benefited more from that than Florida has, and I'll let Jerry speak to that if he can. Okay, I told you can download this presentation later. Dr. Parrish manages the floridascorecard.org, which is unique in the country. It manages how Florida is doing from an economic standpoint on hundreds of data points, but we also have all 67 counties on here. So you can go to the Leon County scorecard and you can be the smartest person in the county. You can know how many jobs we're creating, how many housing starts, how's our economy doing, how many kids are in poverty, how many kids in our schools can't read at third grade level. It's all right there in front of you. And if I had a magic wand, it would be, what if you started all of your meetings off with a couple of slides? How's Leon County changing? How's the region changing? What are you doing about it as business leaders? But I circled for you some numbers up here that I'd like you to look at later. You hear a lot about unemployment. And what's important up here is we have over 350,000 jobs in Florida right now that can't find people to fill them. So when you hear about unemployment rate, be thinking about skills mismatch. What are we doing to help our colleges and our technical schools and our high school? What are we doing to make sure that everybody knows what your needs are, right? That's a big issue. But we have almost 500,000 people that can't find jobs. And so as business leaders, if you just sit there and think, wait a minute, how's this possible? How come we have over 350,000 jobs that can't find people and almost 500,000 jobs, that are people that can't find jobs? It's a skills mismatch. And that's a big opportunity for us. And it's one of the most important numbers on that scorecard. Jerry, I know you're gonna talk about how many jobs were down. So I won't get into that. Leon County, and again, all 67 counties are on the scorecard. I just picked Leon County because we're sitting in it right now. But in a nutshell, we're going to add several 100,000 people we could add over 100,000 people to our community, but I wanted to focus on the job number up here, right? We, pre-COVID, needed to add about 16,000 jobs to Leon County in 10 years, but we've lost over 5,000 jobs since COVID started. And so you need to create between 21 and 22,000 private sector jobs in the next 10 years. And I would submit to you, I wish our county commission had the guts in Leon County to start every single meeting off with this slide. To say, all right, what we want to do is we want to create 21,000 jobs in Leon County between now and 2030. Why not start every county commission meeting off with how's the health of the private sector? How are we doing on creating jobs? And whether it's a parking ordinance or whether it's a tax issue or whether it's a regulatory issue, it should be looked at from the perspective of, is it making our community more competitive or not? Okay, now the way we have this set up today, we're obviously not live in terms of our presentation. I want to give everybody an ask, and that is to go back and look up the Florida Gap Map. This is a tool that Dr. Parrish conceived and created that people around the country are talking about, right? So big state, 67 counties, 405 cities, 22 million people, right? 17th largest economy in the world. But what's important is what's happening in your neighborhood, right? And so for the first time ever, we have given you, Dr. Parrish has given you a tool where you can look up your zip code and you can find out, for example, how many kids are in poverty in the zip code that you live in or the zip code that you work in. And I dare you to look this up and bring it back to your family and say, did you know we have 1,700 kids in poverty in the zip code that we live in? Or get your employees around a table and say, did you know we have 900 kids in our community that can't read, right? It changes what the conversation looks like. So the Florida Gap Map is really what's going on there. And you can see that how many kids we have in our community that are living in poverty. It's thousands. And I'll show you in a minute, we have over 1,000 kids in Leon County in third grade that can't read at third grade level, right? So these are things as business leaders we got to be talking about. What are we going to do about that? How are we going to grow that going forward? 61% of our third graders can read at grade level, which is better than the state average. But check this out. You can't read this, don't worry about it. But here you have the school level. Right? And so when you download this later, you can look up every school in Leon County and you can find out how many kids in that school cannot read at grade level. right? And let's not blame the teachers or the superintendent for this. Let's say, what's your company doing? Can you go in and read to third graders? What can we as business leaders do in the community to change it? These are your future workforce, right? And so we can either make it somebody else's problem or we can make it ours. Again, nothing else in the country exists like this. The U.S. Chamber, a lot of national groups are looking at his work, and many in the legislature are looking at his work as well. Here you have the gap map. Here you have a zip code look, right? So you can literally go to your zip code. We have 10,514 kids in poverty in Leon County. So I'm gonna move off of this because we don't want to get stuck on this, but this is happening in our community. These are your future workers. Some of these people work for you, right? But if we don't know what's going on in our zip code, then it's pretty hard to deal with. Okay, moving on. One of the big issues we've been working on forever is litigation reform, lawsuit abuse. And as you know, we have more billboards in Florida encouraging you to sue someone than any other country, any other state. We have the 5th worst legal climate in the United States. Now, thank goodness to Governor DeSantis. He's single-handedly made a big dent in that number, so when the new rankings come out, it'll be a little bit better. But the average family of 4 pays over $4,400 a year in higher costs just to live in Florida because of our explosive litigation climate. I was asked to just mention a few words about the legislative session. So as Doug Wheeler said, we launched our competitiveness agenda every year. The Speaker and the President are both award winners from the Florida Chamber, which means they vote with us over 90% of the time in their entire legislative career. Doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything, but it's a whole lot better than what they have in New York and California where you can't agree on anything. And so very much looking forward to the legislative environment. You can download this later. This is just a quick look at how many bills are going on. There's going to be about 3,000 bills filed, and there's going to be about 250 that pass. You can take that to the bank. 90% of those bills will pass in the last week of session. And so don't let your guard down because we're just literally getting to like that last 2 minutes in the basketball game. There is over a $2 billion hole in the budget, and so that always has an impact on Tallahassee, something we're keeping a close eye on. In terms of key issues, we're not going to go through all of these, but most of you, when I saw you today, asked, what's on the top of the Chamber's agenda. Our number one issue in the legislature is do no harm, right? You have 160 people, 140, or 40 in the Senate, 120 in the House, most of whom have never signed the front of a paycheck before. And so they have a lot of people coming to them with good ideas, and there's good ideas and there's bad ideas. What we need to make sure is they do no harm. So COVID liability protection for all of you was at the top of our list, and it's at the top of the governor's list, and I feel pretty good about it. It's not done yet, but I feel that you're gonna get basic safeguards. If you took care of your employees and your customers, you shouldn't have to get hit with frivolous lawsuits and lose your business just because somebody got sick and claimed they may have got sick at work. There's an online sales tax component here. Florida is one of only 2 states that does not collect sales tax from out-of-state retailers. And it's us in Missouri. The legislature, I believe, is going to fix that this year. And they're going to take the roughly $700 million in revenue, and they're going to benefit all of you in this room. So instead of you paying higher unemployment insurance rates because of COVID, the legislature is going to use that revenue and they're going to attempt to buy it down. So you don't have an increase, a dramatic increase in your unemployment insurance taxes, or reemployment insurance taxes, I guess we call it. I'll stop right there in terms of issues. We have a massive coalition there. If anybody cares enough about what's going on in the legislature and you want to get signed up for our weekly email alerts every Friday, there's a tool here that'll show you how to do that if you're interested. Let me mention just a word about politics. Right? I put in the slide deck information we don't have time to go over today, but if anybody wants to see how quickly politics are changing in Leon County, we have our own voter file, obviously. We have all registered voters in Florida, so at any point in time, if you want a map of what's going on in a precinct or how are we changing in this particular zip code or how are we changing in this particular county, you can see, by far and away, Leon County is led by Democrats and then Republicans and then NPAs. By 2026, the trajectory Florida's on is will be Democrat, then NPA, then Republican. And so if you look at counties like Duval and others, they're really changing rapidly, right? Leon County hasn't changed all that much, but Florida's changing like crazy. And so just keep in mind that these are things that are going on in the background. And I'm going to get to Jerry here in just a second. One one number, go back here. If you look at the Leon County voter, notice on the bottom right that about 60% of voters in Leon County are under 40, right? So that's fine. Just keep that in the back of your mind. We've been doing polling for years, and we ask the question to voters, which is better, socialism or capitalism? Now, the good news is Florida voters think that capitalism is better than socialism. The bad news is when you cross-tab out the under 40 voter, and remember, Leon County has 60% of our voters under 40. Under 40 voters in Florida think that socialism and capitalism are about the same, or that socialism is better, right? And so again, if I could only share one thing with you today, talk to your employees, talk to your neighbors about why free enterprise matters. Don't assume it's just going to get better. The media is not with us. Many in the legislature aren't with us. And this is a tidal wave that we're up against. It's sort of like the weather we operate in. I'm going to end with a favor to ask of all of you. Doug mentioned the political side of the Florida Chamber. And again, we're nonpartisan. We support Democrats and Republicans and independents. Just it depends on the district, depends on who's running, depends on who's signed the front of a paycheck before. And we're serious about it. We invested more in political action in Florida in the last 2 cycles than the U.S. Chamber did across the country in the last 2 cycles. So that'll give you a little perspective of how serious we are about getting the right people unelected and the right people elected. But we have a brand new initiative I'm going to ask for you to go home and think about. If you've ever thought about running for office, or you know somebody at your company who signed the front of a paycheck who've ever thought about running for office. Again, we don't care what their politics are. We just believe people who've run businesses before think differently, all right? We've created an initiative called the Florida Institute for Political Leadership. And what we found is in the next 5 years in Florida, there's 4,502 electable positions, from librarian to tax collector to school board to county commission to governor. Right? And what we need in Florida in most local areas are better candidates to run in the first place. And so we don't have time to go through this, but what I wanted to show you is, Gadsden County has all kinds of elections in 2021 and 2022. If you look at Madison County, all kinds of elections in the next 2 years. Leon County, all kinds of elections. But where would you go to find out what's up for election next year? And can you share it with your vendors? Can you share it with your family? Can you share it with people at work? What if all somebody needed was to see, oh wow, there's 26 open positions in the next 2 years. Maybe I could run for that, or maybe I could run for something else. So we put together a statewide candidate school. We will not endorse in local races, but if you know business people who are thinking about getting in the game, I want to hear from you, because that's what we need in Florida, are more people who've signed the front of a paycheck before. Okay, now to the brains of the operation. And Doug gave you his background before, but I'm just telling you right now, you could stay here all afternoon and listen to this guy, because there's nobody that has his finger on the pulse of where our economy's going and who's hurting and who's not and where are we going in the future. So get your questions ready for Jerry as soon as he's done. So anyway, thanks everybody. Appreciate the invitation.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for inviting me here. I want to talk a few things about the economy. One of the things that I'm glad to announce is the retirement of a data set. That's always awesome. That always means something. So my first slide is the number of COVID hospitalizations in Florida. And they actually quit counting this on March the 7th, because we were counting it to make sure our hospitals weren't going to be overrun. And you'd see those stories like we did in Italy and New York and all those places. So actually you can see Florida did really well. Our hospital system stayed together, got the worst, the people that needed the care the worst, they got them treated. I did see that the local hospital here in Tallahassee last week announced that they didn't have any COVID patients. So we're not out of the woods yet, but man, this goes a long way, with having vaccinations. I think this is a very positive thing, and certainly Florida has maintained a lot better than most states out there. Now, one of the things, certainly we've had a big effect on is jobs. This is a common job series that a lot of people look at. This is the non-farm series. It includes government jobs. But what you can see is the big drop between February and April of this year. and the recovery. We've recovered more than half of the jobs, but there is still a gap, and I want to talk about the gap a little bit here. I've shown it here on a month-to-month basis. You can see just between March and April, we lost almost 1.2 million jobs. And we all remember what was going on there. And you can see when we reopened the economy, a lot of those jobs came back. But I'm going to talk about the path. If you look at just the private sector jobs, we certainly had 8 solid months of job increases. If you include the government jobs, we've lost quite a few local government jobs around the state. So there are a couple of negative numbers on here. But I want to show it to you by industry. And I hope you're able to read this. You can see the overall number up there at the top. 571,800 jobs from January of last year to January of this year. And that's a 6.3% drop. But if you can see the numbers, almost half of those jobs are in leisure and hospitality. Probably not a surprise to most people because we have areas in Florida, a lot of counties highly dependent on those visitors from other states and other countries. And especially the ones I'll show you in a second, where it's mostly fly-in traffic. We haven't been hit so hard in Northwest Florida. The beaches are still open over in Panama City. I was over there last week. I actually got my COVID shot right outside of Panama City. Decided to go to the beach and see if there's anybody there, and yes, there were a bunch of people there. But when we look at the hospitality part of it and break it down, about 45% plus of the jobs year over year lost in the hotel industry, and about the same in amusement parks and arcades. That's really taken the biggest hit. Others are coming back quickly. Construction, manufacturing, financial services, they're going to be the first that come back. I did a forecast. We do our Economic Outlook Summit every year. Did it in January this year, and actually forecasted by quarter which industries would come back when. And just to tell you about one, leisure and hospitality, actually we'll see a lot more visitors come back this summer. We'll see even more coming back during the winter, but we actually won't get all our tourists back, I think, for 2 years now. It's certainly going to have that kind of effect. Some people won't travel this year, but man, there's a tremendous amount of pent-up demand out there for people to travel, and we're already seeing some of that. You probably saw in the news what happened in Miami Beach this last weekend. There were a bunch of folks down there. So people want to come to Florida. Here's where, this is a heat map if you can see it. The dark areas are the ones, Orlando metro area, Miami metro area, as far as the big drops in jobs, 10, 11, 12% less jobs than they had a year ago in those areas. But once again, it's fly-in traffic from other states and other countries. This is the majority of it. And we will get a lot of those folks back. One of the things I track also is labor force changes. One of the things that's happened over the past year is there have been 390,000 people less in the workforce now than there was a year ago. And so we talk about an unemployment rate. It's 4.8% in Florida. Certainly we're better than the 8s and 9s that New York and California are facing right now. But you got to remember, a lot of people have left the workforce as well. Now, Leon County is not as bad, 2.1% year-over-year drop compared to Florida and the U.S. So not so bad here. But if you count those people that have left the workforce, that's a lot of folks. You can't officially count them as unemployed because they're not looking for work. But what's happened, we've got really good national data that tells us about 80% of these people are females. We don't have good state data on who this is yet. We'll get it later. A lot of females dropped out of the workforce to take care of kids that could no longer go to school, or they're taking care of someone who's sick. That's where the majority of this is. But the good news is that means when, this fall, when all the kids go back to school, and trust me, most of those parents have been sitting around with their kids for a year and a half, will gladly stick them back in school. There'll be additional people in the workforce, maybe some opportunities for you there. So what I've showed you is, depending on where you are in Florida, and absolutely depending on what industry you're in, you've probably had a different effect of COVID. And what's also true is it really affects different levels, salary levels of jobs differently, as you would probably expect. One of the things I've been tracking is the Florida jobs. If you can't see the writing back there, the red line up on top is the high wage jobs. Florida has 5.6% more high wage jobs, and that's 60,000 and above salary than we did before COVID. Hey, that was true back in June. We had more high wage jobs in Florida. That wasn't true in the U.S. We had more high wage jobs in Florida by June than we did before COVID. What's taken the biggest hit, medium wage jobs in there, down 2.4%, low wage 16.5% job loss. So about 1 in every 6 low wage jobs, and that's $27,000 salary or below, are gone. How does that compare? Well, you think that's really horrible until you look at the U.S., and Florida's better on every single category in there. So Florida's actually weathered this a lot better than the average state out there. And hey, let's give credit to where it's due. You've got to give credit to Governor DeSantis for keeping this place open. There's a lot of states that would be willing to change places with Florida now. So it matters where you are in the state. It matters what industry you're in the state. It matters what wage level your job is. It also seriously matters what size of business you're in. One of the things we did during COVID is we combined with Florida's Small Business Development Center, the SBDC, and a group called the Haas Center that does research out of the University of West Florida. And we did a report that we released at our Future of Florida Forum last October. And one of the striking things, and I want everybody to understand this number, we've heard for years that small business creates 2 out of every 3 jobs, or 3 out of every 4, or more than half. What you have to understand as an economist, that drives me berserk, because they'll never tell you what's a small business. Some use the federal category of less than 500 employees. I made the decision. It's like, listen, we're going to count 99 employees and less. Whatever the number is, the number is. What's fascinating about this is you count 99 employees or less size businesses. Since 2012 in Florida, 60% of all net new jobs in this state, and Mark told you, since 2015, we've created more than 1 out of every 11 jobs in this country. So 60% of 1 out of 11 jobs in this country have been created by Florida small businesses since 2012. And that's a big number. We put it on the scorecard. There's what the report looks like. You can see on the right. On the left, it says 59.9%. That's the 2019 number. So continuing around that 60%. And one of the things I like to show is, where is this county? Anybody want to guess what percentage of Leon County's private sector employment is in that less than 100 employees category? Anybody want to take a guess? 80, 90? I hear a lot of that. It's actually lower than that, but it's pretty high. It's about 43.5% here in Leon County. And that does surprise people. But what you can see is in the larger towns, it's a lot lower than that, because they have a lot more big companies. But this is legitimate census level data. I'll be glad to point you to it if you want to take a look at it. But what you can see is that little half moon graph over there. That shows that 60% and the subcategory where they come from. So, certainly matters. Small businesses have taken the biggest hit here, typically because they may have less financial resources than a big company that can stay in business through COVID. So what we found out is 45.4% of Florida's small businesses, and this is back in the August and September timeframe, instead of worrying about taxes or can they hire people or the normal things that businesses worry about, 45.4%, their number one most important concern was staying in business. Am I going to exist here? Now, I'm glad to tell you that we're actually updating this with a survey to those same businesses. More than 4,800 businesses responded to this survey. Super high response rate. Was glad that they were able to participate. Now, I want to talk just for a couple of minutes about the challenges Florida is going to face and the opportunities. One is certainly in our constitutional now is a $15 minimum wage. And as an economist, I've been studying this a lot. I had my grad students over at Florida State University do a lot of analysis on this. And what they found is Florida could lose as many as 500,000 jobs because of this. And you think, wow, okay, there's 10 million people working, 500,000, okay, that's 5%. But it's even worse than that. You know, Florida's doing it by itself. So these northern tier counties, like we're in, are going to be more highly impacted than the average county down in Central or South Florida. Why? Alabama and Georgia are going to stay at the $7.50 federal minimum wage. So if you're in a super competitive business, you're up here on this northern tier of counties, especially in the rural counties. Rural counties are going to take the biggest hit. One of the things I've been talking about as an educator is a higher than market minimum wage distorts the perceived returns for education, perceived financial returns. What does that mean? It means if you're a high school kid, you're looking at, hey, I could make $15 an hour. Mark's got a kid at home. You know, it's like, wow, I could make $15 an hour and live at home with mom and dad, have a bunch of cash. You know, should I invest in myself and go to a state college or go get a certification or go to a university? A lot of people won't because they think they'll get that $15 minimum wage job. And there will be a lot less of those entry-level jobs because we'll automate away from them, we'll combine jobs, be a lot less opportunity. I've said this in the press, I'll keep saying it until people start to believe me. It's going to make Florida less educated and less globally competitive. And some people will say, wow, but you have to realize it'll get some people out of poverty, and you're absolutely right, it will. You know, let's look to the Wall Street Journal. One of the quotes I saw, as many as 3 people will lose their job for every person that you get out of poverty. So I say it's a bad trade-off for the state of Florida, but it's what we have to deal with. That means we have to really make sure we help people get the skills that they need to be worth $15 an hour, because nobody will hire them unless they are, you know. So what I call this is a tax on people with marginal skill levels. It's going to tax them out of the labor market, and they're not going to be able to work until they become worth $15 an hour. So, you know, it's what we're going to deal with here. You know, long-term effects here certainly are going to happen in the state of Florida. Other opportunities, population growth of Florida. You know, you got to think about where we are. Florida's in dark green here. This is a heat map. Florida grew 2012 to 2019 at the second highest number and the 4th largest percent of growth. We know people have been coming to Florida. You know, the only states that grew faster than us are those western states like Idaho and Nevada and Arizona, those areas where people were escaping California and they're high tax, they're moving out to the western states. We get all the people from the north. So I wanted to show you where those people are coming from. Once again, a heat map. If it's dark green, which is New York here, that's where the people are moving from. And this is that same time period. Where are they coming from? You got to remember in Florida that 90% of our net population growth comes from people coming in from other states and other countries. And Puerto Rico's number 2 in this scenario here. So you got to look at that. These are the high tax states or places like Puerto Rico that the economy is in shambles and a lot of people are moving. I will tell you, I looked up something for Mark the other day. I criticized an article that was in the Wall Street Journal, and they were talking about maybe not so many people were moving to Florida. And they were, talking about New York and all this stuff. And so I pointed out more people moved from New York to Puerto Rico last year than moved from Puerto Rico to New York. And I said, how bad must it be in New York when you have to, leave New York and go to Puerto Rico? I mean, it was a pretty good size number too. Now, when we look at the 2020 numbers, it's an estimate. Florida's once again going to grow. The Census Bureau has the net number. We hear a lot of numbers, 800, 900, 1,000 people a day moving to Florida. You got to look at the net here. They're saying a net of 660 a day. I just did my forecast for 2021. I said 800 a day, moving up to 900 again here very shortly. That's the net people. Subtract the people that leave from the people that come in. So Florida is going to continue to grow, no doubt about it. Mark said we could have nearly another 4 million people here by 2030. What's interesting about this is, excuse me, this is a pre-COVID forecast. It's got the top 4 counties receiving a third of that 4 million people, and the top 7 counties getting about half. top 17 counties getting 3/4. Two things will change about this. A couple of things have happened over the past year. One, we've got a 2020 census, 100% count, right? So they'll go back, our 2021 numbers were an estimate. 2022 was an estimate, or 2011, sorry. 2011 was an estimate. 2012 was an estimate. So you got estimate on top of estimate for the last 10 years. Now we got a real count. So they'll go through and true all these up just like you would do. So we don't know exactly how many people are living here. They've been estimates. Now we'll get a really good number, hopefully later this year. What's also happened during COVID, and this is going to help the surrounding counties here. Tallahassee MSA has one county, Leon, and then 3 rural counties attached to it. What's happened, and you watch this change in the forecast when the numbers come out. Our rural counties are actually gaining in population now, and they haven't been. I've been working in rural economic development for a long time. There's really not been much good news over the past several years for rural economic development, but COVID is. Hey, why not live in a rural county when you only have to come to the office once a week? Hey, Mark, maybe Mark will let us come in once a week. I can move even further out in the country. I live about 20 miles out of town now. What if you lived in Chicago and you only had to show up once a month for a staff meeting? Why couldn't you live in Leon County, Florida, or somewhere around the Gulf Coast? Florida is going to win this game. I would have said Florida and Texas are going to win this game, but when you saw the power failure and people freezing over and losing water and all that stuff over in Texas, I think that's going to give Florida another advantage here. So watch this. This is going to help our rural counties. It'll help the Tallahassee MSA because people don't have to drive so much. A lot of them can literally live anywhere they want to. It's going to make Florida very attractive. That's all the slides I showed. I'm going to turn it back over to you guys. If we have time for questions, I know we'll be glad to answer them. Thanks.